The room went absolutely silent. Not the kind of silence that settles after a speech ends or a song finishes. This was the kind of silence that falls when something happens that nobody expected, something that rewrites every assumption in the room without a single word being spoken. A decorated SEAL commander, a man who had survived 3 combat deployments, who had led raids in the darkest corners of the world, who had buried friends and carried on anyway, stood up from his chair, straightened his posture, and delivered a slow, deliberate salute. He was not saluting a general. He was not saluting a senator or a dignitary. He was saluting a woman who held no military rank, whose name was not printed on any official program, whose face had never appeared in a recruitment poster. She was standing near the back of the room in civilian clothes, her hands clasped in front of her, her expression completely still. She did not smile. She did not flinch. She simply nodded, the way someone nods when they have already made peace with every hard thing they have ever done. People in that room later said they would never forget that moment for as long as they lived. And when someone finally asked the commander why he had done it, he said something that stopped everyone cold. He said, "She held the line when none of us could have." So here is the question worth sitting with. What does a person have to endure, sacrifice, and survive to earn that kind of respect from the most elite warriors on earth? This is her story. Her name is not what matters here. What matters is where she came from and why that made everything that followed so much harder and so much more remarkable. She grew up in a mid-sized town in the American South, the kind of place where Friday nights meant high school football and Sunday mornings meant church, where girls were expected to follow a certain kind of path without anyone needing to spell it out. Her father was a veteran, a quiet man who kept his service mostly to himself except for the occasional story that slipped out at the dinner table, stories she absorbed like water into dry ground. He never pushed her toward the military. He never pushed her away from it either. What he gave her instead was something far more durable than direction. He gave her the habit of discipline. She woke up before everyone else in the house from the time she was 12 years old. She ran in the mornings not because anyone told her to, but because something inside her needed the ritual, the silence, the proof that she could make her body do what she asked it to do. By the time she was in high school, she was shooting at a local range with her uncle, a man who had competed in precision shooting events across 3 states. He was patient with her in a way that good teachers always are, correcting her breathing, her grip, her relationship with stillness. Because that is what precision shooting truly requires above all else. It requires the ability to become still in a way that most human beings never learn, to quiet the noise inside, to compress everything into the single moment before the trigger breaks. She was extraordinarily good at it from the very beginning, but she never confused talent with readiness. She understood, even as a teenager, that talent is only the invitation. The work is the actual journey. After high school, she enrolled in a university on a partial academic scholarship, studying criminal justice while quietly processing a question that had been sitting at the center of her life for years. The question was whether she belonged in the military or whether the military would ever consider that she belonged in it. Those are 2 very different questions, and they pulled against each other constantly. She watched news coverage of female soldiers and read everything she could find about women in combat roles. She was not looking for permission. She was looking for evidence that the door was real. When she finally walked into a recruiting office during her junior year of college, she did it alone, without telling her family first, because she needed the decision to be entirely her own. The recruiter across the desk was professional and measured, but she could read people well enough to notice the slight recalibration in his expression when she told him she was interested in combat support roles with a long-term goal of qualifying as a marksmanship instructor. She held his gaze and did not fill the pause with apology or softening. She had already decided who she was. She was simply waiting for the institution to catch up. Basic training is designed to break the version of yourself that walked in so a more functional version can be built in its place. She understood this intellectually before she arrived. Understanding it and living it are separated by an enormous distance, and she crossed that distance one exhausted day at a time. The first week was physical punishment in the most straightforward sense. Runs before dawn, drills through heat that felt like a living thing pressing against her chest, meals eaten in minutes, sleep rationed like a resource in short supply. She did not struggle more than her fellow recruits with the physical demands, but she paid close attention to something that most people in the chaos of those early days could not afford to notice. She watched how people broke down, and more importantly, she watched how they came back from it. The recruits who struggled most visibly in the first week were not always the ones who finished weakest. Some of them found something in the breaking that made them more reliable in the long run. The ones who worried her were the ones who never appeared to struggle at all, because she had already learned from years of training that genuine growth lies on the other side of genuine difficulty. If you never touch the edge, you never find out where it truly is. She found her edge during a land navigation exercise in the third week. The exercise went wrong in a cascading way, with a teammate misreading a terrain feature and fading light, leading their small group significantly off course. The temperature dropped sharply after dark, and the team had to make decisions quickly about whether to push forward or recalibrate from a known point. She took the map without being asked, not to dominate, but because she had studied navigation privately for months, and she knew she could solve the problem if given 60 seconds of quiet. She solved it. They reached their checkpoint late, but they reached it. Nobody in that moment cared who held the map. What mattered was that the group got home. She filed that lesson away carefully because it was one of the most important lessons military service offers, and most people have to learn it the hard way. Leadership is not about the title that precedes your name. It is about the decision you make when the group needs someone to decide. She graduated basic training without fanfare, which is how it should be, because completion is the beginning, not the destination. From there, she moved into advanced individual training, and it was during this phase that her marksmanship scores began attracting the kind of attention she had not anticipated would come so quickly. Her instructors were experienced enough to know the difference between a good shooter and an exceptional one, and they recognized which category she occupied after the first 2 qualification cycles. One of them, a senior NCO with 20 years of service and very few compliments in his vocabulary, told her after her 3rd qualification that she had the cleanest trigger discipline he had seen in a trainee in at least a decade. She thanked him with the same quiet economy she brought to everything else. Then she went back to her bunk and spent the next hour reviewing her own shot placement records, looking for the margins she could still close. The path from exceptional marksmanship scores to a formal sniper qualification program is not a straight line, particularly for a woman operating in a military culture that was still actively negotiating what female soldiers could and could not do in high-intensity roles. She encountered resistance that was sometimes direct and sometimes so subtle it required careful interpretation. There were commanders who supported her advancement without reservation, and there were others whose hesitation communicated everything they would never say aloud. She learned to work within all of it without letting any of it become larger in her mind than her actual mission. That discipline, the discipline of not feeding the obstacles with too much attention, was one of the hardest she ever developed. It went against the natural human instinct to dwell on injustice, to rehearse it, to let it calcify into anger. She felt the anger. She simply refused to let it make her decisions. When the opportunity came to apply for a specialized marksmanship instruction program that served as a pipeline into more advanced roles, she applied immediately, and she prepared for it the way she prepared for everything, with a completeness that left nothing to chance. The selection process involved written evaluations, physical assessments, and 3 days of shooting evaluations under conditions designed to introduce as many variables as possible: wind, distance, time pressure, communication requirements while maintaining position. She had trained for the physical and technical components for years. What she had not fully anticipated was the psychological weight of being watched so closely, of understanding that every decision she made during those 3 days was being assessed not just on its own terms, but in the context of what some people in the room wanted to prove or disprove. She managed it by doing something she had taught herself to do during long shooting sessions. She narrowed her awareness down to the smallest useful frame. Not the room, not the observers, not the politics of the moment. Just the target, just the breath, just the arithmetic of elevation and wind and patience. She performed at the highest level of her group across all 3 days. When results were posted, she read her name at the top of the list once, nodded to herself, and walked to the cafeteria for dinner. Her table mates, 3 men who had also made the cut, congratulated her with the straightforward warmth of people who have just been through something genuinely difficult together. And she accepted it the same way she accepted the salute much later in life, with a quiet nod that contained everything a long speech never could. The instruction program itself lasted several months and pushed her in directions she had not fully anticipated. It was not only about shooting. It was about patience as a practice skill, about observation, about the complex ethical weight of the role itself. There were evening seminars where instructors who had served in active combat zones talked about the decisions they had made and the ones that still visited them at unexpected moments. She listened to all of it with the same attention she brought to technical training, because she understood that the person behind the rifle matters as much as anything the rifle can do, and that the weight of this work had to be carried with full awareness or it would crush you from the inside. Her first real deployment came after she had served 2 years as a marksmanship instructor and had built a reputation inside her unit as someone whose judgment was reliable under conditions that made other people's judgment unpredictable. She was attached to an advisory unit operating in a region where American forces were supporting local military partners in counterterrorism operations. Her role was officially defined as marksmanship support and observation, which was both an accurate and a deliberately incomplete description of what the assignment would actually require. The operating environment was unlike anything training had fully prepared her for, not because training had been inadequate, but because real environments carry a weight and an unpredictability that simulations can approach but never fully replicate. The heat was different. The smells were different. The noise of a place that is both ordinary and dangerous at the same time creates a particular kind of tension that settles into the body after a few days and does not leave until long after you return home. She established her working relationship with her team quickly, because she had learned that trust in a tactical environment is not built through biography or credentials. It is built through small demonstrations of reliability repeated consistently until they compound into something larger. She carried her own equipment without complaint. She communicated clearly and concisely. She did not offer opinions she could not back up. And when the team needed technical expertise, she provided it without the performance of expertise, which is the thing that actually erodes trust in high-stakes environments. The moment that would later be referenced in quiet conversations, the moment that began building the story that ended with that salute, happened during a surveillance operation that had been running for 11 days. The team was tracking movement patterns around a facility that local intelligence had flagged as a coordination point for a regional network. The operation required extended observation from a fixed position under conditions that demanded absolute stillness and absolute silence for hours at a stretch. She had trained for precisely this. On the 11th day, the situation shifted in a way that nobody had predicted, as situations in combat environments are almost designed to do. A vehicle approached the observation position from a direction that indicated someone had become aware of the team's general location. There was no time for extended communication or deliberation. The team leader looked at her. She had the best sight line and the best angle. What happened in the next 40 seconds she has never described in detail to anyone outside of the formal after-action reporting process. And that restraint is itself a form of integrity that the people who heard about it later came to understand as central to her character. What is known is that the team extracted safely. What is known is that the operation's primary intelligence objective was preserved. And what is known is that when the team leader filed his report, he included a line that his own commanding officer later said he had never seen written about a support role operator before. The line read, "Her presence and execution under critical conditions exceeded the performance standard of any specialist I have served alongside in 22 years." She returned from that deployment quieter than she had left, which the people who knew her well understood was not a sign of damage but a sign of depth. Military service changes the people who take it seriously, not by breaking them, but by adding weight that becomes part of how they move through the world. She carried her weight with the same economy she brought to everything else. She did not dramatize what she had experienced, and she did not minimize it. She processed it through training, through long runs in the early morning, through the kind of honest conversation she was selective about, but fully present for when it happened. She was assigned back to her instruction role, and the people she trained noticed immediately that something had shifted in her. Not in her technical instruction, which had always been exceptional, but in the space beneath the technique. She talked to her students differently now. She talked about observation not just as a tactical skill, but as a relationship with the world around you. About patience not just as a discipline of the body, but as a form of respect for the complexity of any situation you are trying to understand. The young soldiers she trained responded to this in a way that told her something important about what people actually need from those who lead them. They need to understand the why. Not just the how and the what, but the why underneath it all. She began developing a curriculum edition that addressed the psychological dimensions of high-pressure marksmanship, the management of stress responses during decision-critical moments, the relationship between mental clarity and physical performance. Her supervisors were initially uncertain about it, because military training cultures move slowly toward innovation and for understandable reasons. She made her case methodically, presenting data from training cycles, referencing established research, and asking only for a pilot period with one training cohort. They approved the pilot. The results were significant enough that the curriculum edition was formally integrated within a year. This was, in many ways, the contribution she was most proud of, not because it was dramatic, but because it would outlast her service, living in the preparation of every soldier who went through that program after her. She was also, during this period, quietly being observed by people operating at levels of the institution she was not yet formally connected to. The SEAL community has its own informal intelligence network about talent worth knowing, and her name had been moving through it since the after-action report from her deployment. She did not know this at the time. She was too busy doing the work to monitor how the work was being perceived. That lack of self-monitoring, that pure orientation toward the task itself, was something the people watching her noted carefully. Because it is rarer than talent and more predictive of the kind of reliability that elite operations actually require. The joint training exercise that brought her into direct contact with the SEAL unit was classified in its specifics, and she has never discussed those specifics publicly. What she has spoken about, in the few interviews she has given to military education programs, is the experience of working alongside operators whose standard of excellence was so high that it created its own particular pressure. Not the pressure of judgment, but the pressure of calibration. She describes it as the feeling of being in a room where the baseline is so elevated that you immediately understand exactly where your own gaps are. And that understanding, though uncomfortable, is one of the most useful things that can happen to a professional. She was tasked during the exercise with supporting long-range observation and providing marksmanship consultation during a simulated hostage recovery scenario. The scenario was designed to compress time and create decision pressure, and it succeeded at both. There was a moment during the second phase of the exercise where a targeting calculation needed to be made under time pressure with incomplete data. The SEAL operators were experienced enough to know that they needed the best available input, and they needed it immediately, and the best available input in that moment was hers. She provided it, not with hesitation and not with performance, but with the clean directness that only comes from genuine preparedness meeting genuine calm. When the exercise concluded, the debrief was thorough and professional, as all military debriefs are designed to be. Commendations and corrections were distributed with equal seriousness. What was not part of any formal record was what happened in the corridor afterward, when the SEAL commander who had run the exercise caught up with her as she was heading toward the exit. He stopped her and told her simply and directly that what she had demonstrated over the course of the exercise was not merely technical skill. He said she demonstrated something that the most experienced operators spend entire careers developing and that some never fully reach. He called it composed authority, the ability to be entirely certain of your contribution without needing the room to confirm it for you. She thanked him. They shook hands. She walked to her vehicle, drove back to her quarters, and wrote in the journal she had kept since basic training. She wrote one sentence. Today I understood why the work was worth it. The salute came later, at a ceremony she attended as a civilian consultant, years after she had transitioned out of active service. She had not expected it. She had not prepared for it. But she received it the way she had always received everything important in her life, with stillness, with presence, and with the kind of quiet dignity that needs nothing added to it. The story of this woman is not the story of someone who fought the military and won. It is not a story about proving a point or dismantling a system. It is a story about what happens when a person commits so completely to excellence and to integrity that the environment around them eventually has no choice but to recognize what it is looking at. She did not ask for the salute. She did not perform toward it. She did not even know it was coming. It came because she had spent years making decisions in the dark, in the silence before dawn, in the stillness before the trigger broke, in the corridor after the debrief, in the journal at the end of the day. It came because she understood something that the most effective leaders in any field eventually come to understand, that real authority is never claimed. It is recognized. She left the military with no rank that the outside world would know and with no name that headlines would carry. But she left something behind that is more durable than either of those things. She left a curriculum that continues to prepare soldiers for the psychological demands of their profession. She left after-action reports that became reference points in discussions about female operators in high-intensity roles. She left the memory, carried by every member of that SEAL team, of what composed authority actually looks like when it is not performing anything for anyone. And she left a question that deserves to live in the mind of everyone who hears this story. The question is not whether women belong in military roles that demand this level of discipline and skill. She answered that question with 11 days in a fixed position, with one targeting calculation under time pressure, with a curriculum built on the evidence of what people actually need to perform when it matters most. The question she leaves behind is larger and more important than that. It is the question of what we might all accomplish if we spent less time measuring ourselves against the room's expectations and more time measuring ourselves against our own deepest standard of what excellent work looks like. She held the line when none of us could have, and she did it without asking anyone to notice.